Welcome back. All right, so we're about 7 weeks into the National Hockey League season, and I wanted to discuss some comment topics that come up a lot. Sometimes I do videos on a couple of these topics where I'll isolate on them, but for today, I wanted to cover these 7 and have that discussion, and then we can go ahead and discuss. I'll give my opinion on these as well. So, starting off at the top of the board, and I've seen this one a lot over the last few weeks. We are seeing the standings very, very close together. And I've seen people saying, hey, if we go to a 3-2-1 point system, 3 for a regulation win, 2 for an overtime win, and 1 for a shootout win or shootout loss or overtime loss, however you want to end up doing that 3-2-1, that it will lead to greater separation and we'll have an idea of who the better teams are. As of, for instance, the Colorado Avalanche, who I did a video on today, have 13 regulation wins. That's 13 extra points for them, right? It also leads to more exciting closing minutes. Over and over, I see a game that in the final 5 minutes, I can tell this is going to overtime. When I'm taking notes, very often the notes just kind of stop after, that 55-minute mark in the game because there might be a couple chances here and there, but you can tell teams are trying to avoid allowing that goal that will, cause them to have a regulation loss. They just want to get it to overtime and ensure that they at least get a point. And so if you went to a 3-2-1 system, you might still see that on some level, but not necessarily as much. But for the NHL, it would erode this parity. And there's been the discussion of whether or not the parity is real or it's not, right? And is it all mediocre? But the NHL likes all these standings being close together. They like the idea of the Bruins going from being outside the playoffs to being first in the Atlantic with a win, right? They like that. They think that's great. The unpredictability, everybody's still in this. Nobody's truly out of it. They think that's fantastic. And one thing that I will throw out there, and I do think this is something to keep in mind, it would add a lot of columns. When I'm looking at the PWHL standings, there are times where I'm like, okay, this is, and you got, okay, all right. And it does. There's extra columns because you have your regulation wins, your overtime wins, your shootout loss, overtime loss, regulation loss. There are ways to fix it so it's not quite as many columns as that, sure. But it is something that it doesn't make it quite as simple. And I know that may seem like a small thing, and it is, but it's something I wanted to throw on the board. Personally, I don't mind the point system being as it is. I don't know how much it would change the game if you went to 3-2-1. I think it might make things more exciting down the stretch, teams trying to get the 3 points instead of less. But I think that would have to be tested in the AHL first. So before we'd see it in the NHL, I would think we'd see it in the American League and have them try it out. 82-game season's too long. I see this one a lot. I don't necessarily disagree. Keep in mind next year it's 84. So it's going up, it's not going down. Fewer games would allow for more days off. It allow for more of a recovery, which means you'd have fewer injuries. We're seeing a lot of injuries this year. The squashed schedule is part of it, and it feels like the schedule becomes more condensed every year. We see more back-to-backs, more 3 games in 4 nights, and you're just going to see more guys getting hurt. Guys who maybe they get dinged on a Friday, happens again on the Saturday, and then on the Monday, then they end up being out of commission for a while. However, I did this in green because money. It would mean less money. If you went to, say, a 65-game schedule, you're going to be making less money unless the league takes ticket prices and sends them a lot higher. So it would mean less money for the league. The league doesn't seem to enjoy the idea of less money. This is why the amount of games in a season just keeps going up. Now, when I started watching hockey back in the early 80s, it was an 80-game schedule. We did have an 84-game schedule, which included neutral site games. They took those away. It went down to an 82-game schedule. 82, 84, it's fine. It's just, I think the pacing of the season sometimes can be an issue. But either way, I don't mind an 82-game schedule. I know that it's going to go to 84. It's not gonna change things dramatically. It just means I have one less week of off season, right? The 1 versus 8 playoffs. Every year I do a video on it, although I don't think I did this past season. I don't think I talked about it because I was like, I don't have a new way of looking at it, which is why it's just thrown onto the board. People want new matchups. I would also caution that when we had the 1v8 system, sometimes we still had the same teams against each other year after year after year. It just works out that way. and we definitely still would if you went with 1v8 system, the 1v8 system now. The negative, the panic thing for this from the NHL's perspective is both the league and their broadcasters like those rivalry matchups in the first and second round. They also like knowing who's going to face who in the second round a heck of a lot earlier. When you had 1v8, if you had the 8th seed knock off the first seed, it could throw everything off about everybody else who they were playing in the next round. And so you can end up in a situation where you don't necessarily who's going to be playing against who until a couple of days before the next round starts. We as fans really like that. The broadcasters don't seem to like it so much. The system we have now is in part because broadcasters like Rogers and and ESPN think that it's better. Raising the draft age to 19. I see this a lot when we talk about busts. And yes, you'd have fewer busts if you raise the draft age to 19. It also would probably be better for development. However, raising the draft age to 19, the first issue to me is a stark issue. And it's why I would not necessarily be in favor of raising the draft age. Oh, yeah. The 1v8 playoffs, I don't really care one way or the other. I'm sorry. I don't want to see Edmonton and LA in the first round either, but I have a feeling if we went 1 versus 8, somehow they'd still play each other. So the whole idea of the raising the draft age would destroy that first draft after you raise the draft age to 19. Nobody's going to want those first round draft picks. They're all going to get traded because you're taking all the 18-year-olds out of the draft. Now what you've got left is players who got skipped in the previous draft. So that draft class is just done. And the other problem is the reason we have an 18-year-old draft age is Ken Linsman. Ken Linsman made sure he fought for it. And legally it was decided, yeah, he can play in the NHL at 18. The NHL drops the age to 18 in 1979. Go look at the 1979 draft. Loaded. It was loaded because it was 2 draft classes for the price of 1. And so I can't see the NHL raising the draft age to 19. I could see them altering the draft age a little bit. Like I've seen people say, well, maybe only 18-year-olds will be drafted in the first round and they can't be drafted after the first round. I've seen that floated out there. I just can't see the league doing it. So I'm not one that's going to stand here and say I'm, rooting for a 19-year-old age range when it comes to, the youngest you can draft them into the National Hockey League. One that I personally have talked about, the Cup is awarded too late. I think that late June for the Stanley Cup to be awarded is insane. I think there should be a way to have the Stanley Cup awarded by, I would say like June 14th would make me happy. It was like June 13th or 14th where they're handing out the cup. I'm old enough to remember when it would be handed out very early in June, and that was debated back then. I remember the first time a game was played in June, and the debate was, why are we doing this in June? And it's poor ice. It's poor ice in summer. Like you've got these buildings that are in, 100 degree, 90 degree heat Fahrenheit. It's very difficult to keep the ice in good shape. They do the best they can, but it does get chewed up at times depending on the location. And then you have fans probably not thinking as much about hockey when it's so brilliantly wonderful outside and you can go to the beach rather than sitting at home watching a hockey game, which might influence ratings for the Stanley Cup playoffs at that point, right? Especially if you don't have a dog in the fight, you don't really care who wins the Stanley Cup final, you might have a beach day instead. And I don't say that's a bad thing. I'm not going to say that because I enjoy your beach day. But it does seem to hurt the ratings. I think that's part of it. Obviously, the ratings are still really strong in Canada, but in the U.S., where it's not like the mainstream number one sport, having the Stanley Cup awarded in late June just feels kind of, for me, it's always felt kind of off. The thing is, moving the season forward, which is what you would have to do, the league doesn't seem to want to do that, and neither do the broadcasters. The broadcasters want to keep the NHL away from the opening weekend of the NFL, and they don't want to be competing against that huge audience. I've talked before about how it sometimes feels like the NHL is just, its broadcasts are decided via fear of going against other sports. But it's not the NHL that's necessarily driving that either. It can be the broadcasters themselves that are like, no, we have these games we're broadcasting. We want you to move your schedule to this, which can drive those of us fans who would rather not see that drive us nuts. But I don't think it's going to change. So I would love to see the season move forward. I'd love to see the NHL start their season, say September 15th. I don't think that's going to happen. And they're going to move it forward into September a little bit this coming season because of the 84 game schedule, but that's just taking out a week of preseason in order to do that. And there are definitely some people who don't think taking a week out of the preseason is great. But there are those of us, myself included, that think the preseason is just too long. So I would love to see the Stanley Cup awarded earlier than it is. I just don't think it's going to happen. Blackouts suck. We can all agree on this, that the blackouts are a pain. They're a royal pain. And it is that people think that the NHL should get more eyeballs on the product, right? And these blackouts, these regional games don't make sense. But the regional rights are not national rights. So say, for instance, with TSN. TSN has the regional rights for Montreal games or Ottawa games. If those games are broadcast nationally and there's no blackout associated with it, suddenly those aren't regional games then. And then Rogers wouldn't be all that happy that all of a sudden TSN's got national games being played, since Sportsnet/Rogers has that exclusive right in Canada to have those games broadcast nationally. If you're going to argue TSN's broadcasts are better than Sportsnet's, I'm not going to make any argument on that. I think TSN does a great job broadcasting the sport. I was sad when the NHL just renewed their contract with Rogers and didn't actually open it up for anybody else to even bid on it. I think TSN should have some national games, but they don't. And so the blackouts are going to be in effect until we do away with the idea of just regional broadcasters and all of that. But that's where you're getting into the whole legal thing, and all these contracts are signed for national broadcasting rights. And so it's a mess. I totally agree with people that the regional broadcasts, the blackouts are a pain. But that's why I've been paying for NHL Center Ice since before I had a channel. I got tired of those blackouts myself, and so I paid for the right to watch the hockey games. So yeah, and it would be a very different experience on this channel if I didn't have NHL Center Ice and I was just going with what was broadcast nationally. Reviews would be a heck of a lot less long, and there'd be a lot less to discuss. There'd be nights where I'd be like, well, there weren't any games on nationally for me. And I know people are going to say, oh, you can go to the pirate streams online. I know, I'm just saying that if I go the way that I'm going now with how I watch sports, it wouldn't work. Clarity with the rules. So I'm going to close out with this one. This is that, and the first thing I want to say, I'm going to go over to this side, that team biases always seem to color opinions, and I've seen that everywhere. Whenever I post a review or power rankings, people leave comments and I go, I know who you cheer for, and I know who you cheer for, and it's not always the profile picture, although that could be a dead giveaway, but sometimes just the verbiage they use. I'm like, yeah, I know exactly who you're rooting for. And so I always think of that as, so there's that bias there. And I understand. I've had to fight that myself over the last 9 years. When this channel started out, there were times where I was heavily biased because Canucks, and I had to kind of kick that out and go, no, come on now, stop it. So I had to do that with myself, and I mean, I'm in my 80s. So at any rate, if this old dog can learn new tricks, I guess anybody can. But I think they could explain things a little better when it comes to clarity of the rules. So goals not allowed. Sometimes they'll release something on social media. I don't think there's anything wrong with having more explanation after games, which would mean making the officials available after the game. You could just have officials talking about the penalties they called. And I think for the NHL, and it's not over here, but I'll say this, I don't think the NHL wants to open Pandora's box there and have referees going, yeah, I missed that. Yeah, that wasn't the right call. That was wrong. I'm sorry I missed that. That should have been a penalty. I didn't call it. I think there's a slippery slope there, and they don't want that. They don't want officials being embarrassed. Plus, the other reason why I think we don't see officials made available after the game, the NHL took referees' names off their jerseys. I'm old enough to remember when referees didn't wear a helmet and they had the name on the back of the jersey. And at the start of the game, you'd go, all right, so Andy Van Helleman's calling this game, huh? Well, our team's screwed. And you, so the NHL, there's still some of that. But when you take the names off the back of the jerseys, I think it helps to prevent that kind of thing from fans and I think to some extent from media as well. Although we know who these officials are, I think the NHL wants to keep things as everybody's the same as possible, right? And if you have officials talking after games and you get more of their personality and everything, eventually there'd be some that fans go, I love that one and I don't like him. I don't like how he explained that. That's wrong. So we're not going to see officials made available after games. And that's the thing. And obviously team biases are going to color opinions one way or the other. And I always get a kick out of that. One thing that I miss, and I'll close on this, one thing that I miss in watching hockey now over the last couple of years is that with NHL Center Ice, I would be able to choose which feed I was watching. So when there was a goalie interference call or there was some kind of controversial play, I would switch back and forth between the broadcasts to see how it was being presented on those broadcasts. And 9 times out of 10, it was presented very differently with one broadcast over the other. And so one would be arguing this is not goalie interference because, and you'd flip over to the other one, the other one goes, well, clearly this is goalie interference. So the people watching that would go, that's a very persuasive argument. And so then after the game's done, those fans are arguing with each other. After the call comes out, those fans are arguing with each other. And it really is just the lens is colored by which team is playing and who the call goes for or against. I try to get as much of that out of my videos as possible. I know it can't 100% be out, but I do my best. So thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. If you guys can come up with other controversial National Hockey League related topics that I could do kind of a bullet point and discuss here. I will say the clarity with the rules, I would love to see the NHL explain a little bit more, just a little bit. The blackouts issue, I would love to see that gone, but I am not a huge fan of one company controlling the entire national broadcasting rights. So that's just my opinion, is that it's better if you have multiple companies because it forces them to improve their product. It's very similar to the argument I always make with wrestling on the other channel, that you're better off having more than one company in terms of pro wrestling because it forces that main company, which would be WWE, right? Forces them to be a little bit better. At least it should force them to give you a little bit better of a product. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe in the event that you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. It's greatly appreciated. I will talk to you again soon.